9960th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Syrian Arab Republic, Tunisia, and Turkey to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Khalid Khari, Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia, and Pacific, Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of the item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Khalid Khari.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this timely meeting as Syria contends with another episode of violence that puts at risk its path to a peaceful, credible, orderly, and inclusive political transition. Before I brief you on latest strikes on Syria territory, allow me to first address the volatile context. On 12th of July, a series of mutual kidnappings in the Druze majority governorate of Suwaida, southern Syria, escalated into armed clashes between the Bedouin tribes and local Druze armed groups. On 14th of July, the Syrian authorities started deploying security forces under the auspices of the Ministries of Defense and Interior, with the stated aim of halting the clashes, restoring order, and pursuing those responsible for the events and bringing them before the competent judiciary. The Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs informed Special Envoy Pedersen and diplomatic missions that some of these security forces were attacked by Druze armed groups. 10 were killed and others were abducted. There were also reports of the authorities' security forces carrying out violations against civilians as they entered Suwaida. The ensuing fighting resulted in hundreds of casualties among the Damascus security forces and Druze fighters, and tragically among Druze and Bedouin civilians, including women, children, and elderly. Hundreds were also injured. There were further alarming reports of civilian religious figures and detainees being subjected to extrajudicial executions and humiliating and degrading treatment. Footage of desecration and mutilation of corpses, as well as incidents of sectarian incitement and looting of private property, was widely circulated on social and conventional media, causing further trauma and fueling intercommunal tensions and violence. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, civilians caught up in ongoing violence continue to face serious risks, with significant displacement and reports of damage to critical infrastructure, including water, electricity, and telecommunication networks. Medical facilities in Suwaida and Daraa are at or near capacity and further impacted by the cuts to electricity and water. Commercial supplies have been disrupted and access to the impacted areas remains severely constrained due to insecurity and road closure. The World Health Organization has dispatched emergency medical supplies to Daraa to support trauma care, but deliveries to Suwaida remain pending due to security access. The United Nations and humanitarian partners are engaging with relevant authorities and are mobilizing to send teams to assess the needs and provide essential assistance as soon as the conditions allow. Mr. President, I reiterate the Secretary General's unequivocal condemnation of all violence against civilians, including all acts that fan the flames of sectarian tensions and rob the people of Syria of their opportunity for peace and reconciliation, after 14 years of brutal conflict. Special Envoy Pedersen and his team on the ground are actively engaged with all parties to address the situation. Against this backdrop, I take note of the statement by the Syrian Office of the Presidency condemning the violations and committing to investigate and hold to account those responsible for them. I appeal to the Syrian authorities to ensure this investigation is transparent and in line with international standards, and is also completed fast, not least to instill confidence among all Syrians that their state will guarantee protection and justice for all citizens without distinction. As this Council has underlined in its presidential statement of 14 March 2025, inclusive and transparent justice and reconciliation processes are both important and urgent for sustainable peace in Syria. I further urge all parties to take constant care to protect civilians, including allowing them to move freely to seek safety and medical assistance. I call on all parties to safeguard infrastructure providing critical services like water and electricity, and to facilitate humanitarian access to people in need. Mr. President, against this complicated and volatile backdrop, citing the violation against the Druze community and pledging to protect them, between 12 and 16 July, Israel resumed and intensified its airstrikes on Syrian territory. In this respect, I echo the Secretary General's condemnation of Israel's escalatory airstrikes, including on Suwaida, Daraa, and in the center of the capital, Damascus. The strikes targeted the Damascus authorities' forces and official buildings, including the Ministry of Defense and the vicinity of the Presidential Palace, as well as the Mazeh military airport. The permanent representative of Syria has informed the Secretary General and the Security Council in his letter dated 16 July 2025 that these attacks have resulted in casualties among civilian and security forces. Israel also made statements regarding the redeployment of additional IDF troops on the Golan. Mr. President, on 15 and 16 July, hundreds of members of the Druze community from the occupied Syrian Golan and Syrian gathered on both sides of the ceasefire line in the presence of the IDF in solidarity with the Druze community in Suwaida. Some from the occupied Syrian Golan crossed the ceasefire line and traveled to Hadar on the Bravo side before subsequently returning. Mr. President, in addition to violating Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, Israel's actions undermine efforts to build a new Syria at peace with itself and the region and further destabilize Syria at a sensitive time. It is essential that both Israel and Syria uphold the terms of 1974 disengagement of forces agreement to preserve the ceasefire between both parties and refrain from any action that will further undermine it and the stability on the Golan. Mr. President, I take note of ongoing efforts to establish a ceasefire, including, as President al-Shara stated, through American, Arab, and Turkish mediation. The situation on the ground is fluid, and as I speak, there are troubling reports of renewed violence in some areas that appears to be targeting Bedouin communities after the withdrawal of the Damascus security forces. I hope that the situation will solidify into genuine and lasting de-escalation on the ground that includes all sides and stakeholders. I take note of the arrangement announced by President Shara that security in the governorate will be maintained by some local factions and spiritual leaders. And I welcome his tribute to the Syrian people's sacrifice over 14 years and their aspirations for freedom, dignity, and equality, and that the Druze community is an integral part of the Syrian fabric, social fabric. Security and stability in Suwaida, and indeed in post-Assad Syria, can only be achieved through genuine reconciliation and with the participation of all components of Syria's diverse society. I urge all Syrian stakeholders to commit to dialogue and emphasize the United Nations' readiness to work alongside the Syrian people to support an inclusive and credible political transition that ensures accountability, fosters national healing, and lays the foundation for Syria's long-term recovery and prosperity. Allow me to conclude by reiterating this Council's call in the wake of another episode of sectarian violence and avoidable bloodshed in March 2025 for the implementation of an inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process facilitated by the United Nations and based on the key principles listed in Resolution 2254. This includes safeguarding the rights of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity and religion. This political process should meet the legitimate aspirations of all Syrians, protect all of them, and enable them to peacefully, independently, and democratically determine their futures. Only then can Syria truly emerge from the legacy of conflict and embrace a peaceful future. The United Nations, with the guidance from this Council, stands ready to assist in this process. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Kyari for his briefing. I now give the floor to the members of the Council. To begin with, I would like to welcome and give the floor to His Excellency Mr. George Gerapetritis, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President, and allow me also to thank Assistant Secretary General Khaled Kyari for the detailed briefing. Today's meeting comes at another critical moment for Syria. We share the deep concern expressed by the Secretary General on the continued escalation of violence in Shueida, a Druze-majority area in southern Syria, which has reportedly resulted in heavy casualties, including civilians and numerous injured and displaced persons. We are all particularly disturbed by reports of humiliating treatment of civilians, the desecration and mutilation of corpses, sectarian incitement, are deeply disturbing, as referred to with the statement of Special Envoy Pedersen. We strongly condemn all attacks perpetrated against civilians and religious sites in Shueida. This includes arbitrary killings and acts inciting sectarian violence. I would like to refer also to yesterday's attack against the Greek Catholic Church of Mar Michael in Sawara, another incident after the terrorist bombing attack against the Greek Orthodox Church of Mar Elias, which this Council strongly condemned, further highlights the challenges for the Christian community in Syria and the need for full protection of all ethnic and religious components in a united Syria. In this context, special attention should be given to hate speech and incitement to violent actions against the aforementioned parts of Syrian society. We stand in solidarity with Syria and all victims of this violence and express our condolences to their families. We call for de-escalation and for urgent measures to be implemented to restore calm and facilitate humanitarian access. Greece requests that Syria's transitional authorities contribute sincerely and effectively to immediate de-escalation, ensure accountability for the crimes committed, and create a secure environment for all Syrians. We take note of the statement by Syria's transitional authorities on a ceasefire reached in Shueida, as well as on condemning the violations and committing to holding those responsible into account after proper investigation. We expect this process to be transparent, swift, and consistent with international standards, as this is imperative for all Syrians to feel safe at home. Mr. President, we reiterate, as we have publicly done so, our full support for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as for the respect of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement and the work of UNDOF and its staff. Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity go hand in hand with the fundamental right of all Syrians, irrespective of religious and ethnic background, to live in peace without fear. Mr. President, as I mentioned earlier, it was less than a month ago that we convened this Council in a closed format on the abhorrent suicide bombing at the Greek Orthodox Mar Elia Church in Damascus, a terrorist attack that spread death and agony among peaceful civilians in their sacred place of worship. The Syrian people, with their rich and vibrant diversity, history, and heritage, will always be stronger than terrorism in all its forms. Recent developments bear testament to the vigilance required of this Council as we go forward in a gradual, cautious, step-by-step approach on this file. As Syria stands at a crossroads, it is imperative that we support a credible, orderly, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned inclusive political transition aligned with the key principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. The gravity of recent and ongoing developments demonstrates that national reconciliation, tackling sectarian violence and the threat posed by terrorist foreign fighters in Syria, as well as ensuring the safety of all Syrians, are key to a united and prosperous Syria. Greece will continue its ongoing efforts to support the Syrian people and the United Nations in this endeavor for peace, stability, and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gera Petritis for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3 Plus members, namely Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. At the outset, the A3 Plus extends its sincere appreciation to ASG Khalid Kiari for his informative briefing. Mr. President, the A3 Plus expresses its deep concern regarding the latest development in the Syrian Arab Republic. We have consistently advocated for stable, sovereign, and prosperous Syria. Its continued destabilization risks exacerbating tensions across an already fragile Middle East. We condemn the Israeli airstrikes that recently targeted multiple areas in Syria, including Syria's military staff command building, which was being used to temporarily house the Ministry of Defense, and locations in the vicinity of the presidential palace in Damascus. These acts further threaten an already fragile state. These attacks represent a clear violation of international law, including the United Nations Charter, particularly Article 2.4, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations and the principles of international humanitarian law. Furthermore, these airstrikes breach the terms of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement between Israel and the Syrian Arab Republic. We reiterate our call for full respect and implementation of this agreement, as well as relevant Security Council resolutions, including the most recently adopted Resolution 2782, which stresses that both parties must abide by the terms of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement and scrupulously observe the ceasefire. Mr. President, the A3 Plus reaffirms its position in support of an inclusive, credible, and Syrian-led political transition that allows all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religion, to participate in building the future of their country. A Syria built by all Syrians and for all Syrians, without exclusion, is the only path to durable peace and remains pivotal to regional peace and security. We are particularly alarmed by the recent escalation of violence in Sweden, a majority Druze region, which has reportedly resulted in the deaths of hundreds, including civilians, and has caused significant injuries and displacement. On protection of Syrian minorities, the A3 Plus wants to be clear that it is the responsibility of the Syrian interim authorities to protect all Syrians, including the Druze community. In this regard, we welcome the statement and commitment of the interim president in protecting communities and fostering national cohesion. The A3 Plus unequivocally condemns these acts of violence and stresses that those responsible must be brought to justice. We express our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and wish a speedy recovery to those injured. We call upon the interim Syrian authorities to conduct a thorough, transparent, and impartial investigation and to hold the perpetrators accountable. We also take note of the statement issued by the Office of the Syrian Presidency in this regard and look forward to seeing concrete steps taken in response. The A3 Plus reiterates its support for efforts aimed at truth, reconciliation, and accountability. After 14 years of conflict, the Syrian people, all of them, deserve peace, security, and prosperity. There is no place for vengeance or retribution. What is needed now is national dialogue, reconciliation, and unity. Mr. President, the recent events underscore once again the fragile nature of the situation in Syria. It requires urgent and sustained efforts to foster coexistence among its communities. National ownership of an inclusive political process must be preserved and promoted. We further stress the need for regional de-escalation and reaffirm our support for Syria's sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity. External interference continues to fuel instability and deepen Syria's fragility. We urge all actors to prioritize dialogue, refrain from actions that may further deteriorate the situation, uphold the principles of the UN Charter, and to work collectively to ensure the well-being and dignity of the Syrian people. The A3 Plus remains committed to engaging constructively in this regard. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин
Mr. President, we thank the Pakistani presidency for very swiftly reacting to the request from Syria to convene this meeting of the Security Council. The request, which was supported by Algeria and Somalia, has to do with yet another dangerous spiral of tension in the Middle East, and this time this impacts Syria. We would like to thank Khaled Kiali for his briefing. We are very worried by what is happening in Syria. The brotherly people of Syria is something that we are tied to through friendship, cooperation, and our heart goes out to them. The Syrians have deserved a peaceful, calm life without the fear of persecution because they belong to a given ethnic or a faith group. The way to sustainable normalization in Syria is exclusively through an inclusive and Syrian-nature dialogue in line with the Resolution 2254 and through strengthening national reconciliation, ensuring a genuine participation of all political, ethnic, and religious groups without imposing external formula and without excluding from that the representatives of various communities of the multi-religious Syrian society. Syria has always been the home for many peoples and religions, and this is its strength and its historic significance. The international community must help Syrians keep the integrity of this diverse country and ensure its right for a peaceful future. Unfortunately, so far, this process has not become irreversible yet. So today, again, the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic once again is at the core of our importance here after a sharp worsening of the situation in the south, in particular in the Suweda province. Let's set aside for the moment the legitimate action by Israel, which we condemn and to which we will revert, but let me now address the root causes of the current crisis. On the 13th of July, in the south of the country, there were clashes, and initially between the Druze and the Bedouin tribes. After that, the administrative center of the governorship received units that were sent by the Ministry of Defense and Internal Affairs of Syria. As a result of very harsh clashes between the security entities and local armed units, tens of people died, including civilians, representative of ethnic and religious minorities. Hundreds of people were wounded and had to leave their homes in search of safety. What we saw in the mass media and social networks, so the footage we saw there show atrocities of armed gangs drunk on their own impunity, attacking defenseless people. This is shocking and recalls the tragic events in the west of Syria, which gave rise to many questions which we still need to receive answers to. The silence of the international community of such a situation is unacceptable. We would like to express our heartfelt condolences to all of the Syrians who suffered from this bloodshed, and we strongly condemn any forms of violence against civilians, regardless of who is perpetrating that or what pretext is being used. It is our view that attempting to attack the life and safety of civilians is unacceptable. We call for an immediate de-escalation, restoring calm, and ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access for all of those in need. As was pointed out by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, what is happening there is not just clashes, but an open violation of humanitarian norms, which includes extrajudicial killings, acts of interreligious violence, and forced displacement of civilians. Such recurring outbursts of violence do not only underscore the ethnic and religious stability of a future Syria and the trust in transition, but they endanger the very Syrian statehood. It's important to make sure that the UN leadership, including the special envoy, Mr. Peterson, whose staff are on the ground, that they are not afraid of providing a proper assessment of what is happening there. The reference to the so-called fight with the remainders of the regime or clashes with pro-Assad elements, which were heard from some representative of Syrian leadership and from abroad, cannot be used as a justification for the prosecution of religious and national minorities or ethnic and religious cleansing. Despite the statements made that a number of bad reputation armed groups were disbanded, in actual fact, many of them remained and became participants in the current escalation. It is particularly worrying to see that amongst the security personnel who are there to ensure the safety of the people, including ethnic and religious minorities' safety, that in those ranks we can see foreign terrorist fighters. There's many and evidence pointing to the fact that they're not citizens of Syria and quite frequently openly associate themselves with ISIL or express sympathy towards ISIL. And this has been shown in open sources of information. We also see that on videos that have been posted by the fighters themselves. In a number of cases, these armed cutthroats openly threaten attacks against Christians, Alawites, the Druze, and the Kurds. It is clear that this is not the kind of foundation on which you can build a viable state respecting the interests of all Syrians. And that is why we think that the current confrontation is not a tragic incident. And the reason here is not just the situation in which the ethnic religious minorities find themselves. We have stated many times that there was a risk in marginalizing whole strata of Syrian society, which was also earlier the case in Iraq, when in the absence of national dialogue and integration mechanism, state institutions were destroyed and thousands of people, thousands of armed people remained outside state institutions. The campaign to prosecute those who were in favor of the old regime split the Syrian society now the way it split the Iraqi society earlier, but it also creates the conditions for the radicals' revanche. And we can see the consequences of that. We can see spontaneous armed groups who are, again, lording it over people on the streets of Syrian cities and act guided by fear and impunity. Let me recall here that it is imperative to ensure the safety of Russian nationals and facilities in Syria, and we demand that the Syrian authorities undertake appropriate measures here. According to the information we have, the most destructive scenario for Syria's development is something that we managed to avoid. We took note of the announcement made that there was an agreement on a ceasefire and the statement by the leadership of Syria which condemns the human rights violations and the pledge to conduct an investigation of crimes against civilians. What is of principal importance is to make sure that this be followed by specific steps in line with the principle of transparency and accountability, which was what the Secretary General of the UN called for insistently. It's important to make sure also that the Security Council receive information about the outcome and the state of investigation of tragic events in the west of Syria, and that we generally be kept abreast of the steps undertaken by the new authorities to protect the ethnic and religious minorities. Mr. President, we're also very concerned by the fact that these worrying events are also accompanied by the intensification of Israeli Air Force activity in Syria. I am referring to new waves of Israeli airstrikes against Damascus and the southern areas of Syria, which, according to what was said by West Jerusalem, were conducted so as to protect the Syrian Druze. Amongst the entities struck are the buildings belonging to the Ministry of Defense of Syria, including the General Staff Building, which is in the center of the Syrian capital, and the regions which are very close to the presidential palace. There are people who have been killed and many wounded. We have on many an occasion provided an assessment to the arbitrary actions by Israel in Syria and condemned them and condemn them now. These attacks are a gross violation of international law, UN Charter, and the disengagement of forces agreement of 1974. Russia has been consistently supporting the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. And this is not just a diplomatic formula. This is a foundation of the future peaceful structure of the country. These principles cannot be traded over or be subject to double standards. We cannot allow a situation where players, external or internal, use a fragile situation in Syria for their own geopolitical purposes, especially through fomenting ethnic and religious tension and undermining the fragile Syrian statehood. And domestic players should not provide causes for this. I thank you.
Thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I also thank ASG Khari for briefing us today. President, I'd like to make 3 points. First, the UK is deeply concerned by the escalating violence in Sueda. We have urged all parties to de-escalate and take immediate action to protect civilians. We are alarmed by reports of attacks on medical personnel and facilities. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must never be targeted, and we call on all parties to ensure humanitarian aid can reach those who need it. We take note of President al-Shara's comments on the importance of protection of Syria's Druze community and accountability for those who have committed attacks, and we urge that investigations and steps towards accountability take place swiftly. Second, we're deeply concerned by Israel's escalatory strikes in Damascus. We repeat our call for Israel to refrain from actions that risk destabilizing Syria and the wider region. Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. We welcome the news that a ceasefire has been agreed, and we urge all parties to commit to maintaining it. Third, this is a critical moment for Syria and for the stability of the region. My Foreign Secretary travelled to Damascus earlier this month, where he held productive talks and heard from the Syrian government and ordinary Syrians about their aspirations for the country. A peaceful and secure future for the Syrian people requires all of Syria's communities to be protected and fully included in the political transition. So we call on the Syrian government to prioritise genuine inclusivity and representation in the appointment and election of People's Assembly members and in all further elements of the political transition. An accountability process is also critical to ensuring stability and lasting peace. We urge the Syrian government to investigate human rights violations and abuses by all parties and ensure those responsible are held to account. We look forward to seeing the Syrian government's report on the violence in the coastal areas in March. This is a crucial step towards justice and reconciliation for the Syrian people. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement and I'll give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Panama is grateful for the convening of this emergency meeting, just as we are for the briefing delivered by Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Khalid Kyari. In recent days, we have witnessed a grave escalation of violence in the south of Syria. The sectarian fighting in the city of Syria, followed by clashes between military forces with civilians stuck in the middle, and the airstrikes in Daraa and Damascus, which even hit buildings of Syria's public administration, are reprehensible and stand as a worrying step backwards. This is a development that undermines Syria's political transition process, its reconciliation and its unity. The figures are devastating. Since Sunday, at least 248 people have died in Syria, at least 5 have died in Damascus, and hundreds of people have been wounded. The civilian population, in particular women, children and older persons, cannot continue to be the victims of military or geopolitical agendas. We condemn all violence against the civilian population, as well as the arbitrary killings that have been reported and deserve investigation. We also condemn actions which fan the flames of sectarian tension and undermine the Syrian people's ability to achieve peace, reconciliation and a sustainable political solution after 14 years of brutal conflict. Panama supports the Secretary General's appeal. He reiterated the urgent need for an immediate de-escalation, as well as for full respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria and the need to facilitate humanitarian access. We agree on the importance of a credible, orderly and inclusive political transition. This in accordance with the Resolution 2254 of this Security Council, including all sectors of Syrian society in the political decision-making process, is the only effective path by which we can avoid outbreaks of violence and instability. We do recognize that Syrian society is complex in its composition. However, we are nevertheless concerned by the instrumentalization of minority communities and the differences between them to undermine social cohesion and fuel sectarian conflict. In this vein, we encourage compliance with the cessation of hostilities agreement recently achieved between the Syrian interim authorities and local Druze leaders. That agreement is a crucial starting point in order to achieve de-escalation and stability in the region. Continued violations of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement threaten the security of local people and that of the international personnel deployed. We urge all regional stakeholders to refrain from allowing further fragmentation of Syrian society. We also urge them to respect the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement and to guarantee that the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force can be fully operational. We reiterate our staunch support for the work of the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force. That mission is essential to preserve stability, avoid greater escalation, and to foster the environment necessary for dialogue. Mr. President, peace is built with dialogue, but it is also built with mutual respect. As a country cognizant of its own history, we reject all military action which undermines the territorial integrity or the sovereignty of a state. Syria's destiny at this crucial juncture is a litmus test for the international community and of whether or not it harbours genuine will to buttress a rule-based order, an effective rule-based order. After more than a decade of conflict, the Syrian people deserve a lasting peace, and the United Nations must continue to play a crucial role in ensuring this collective effort bears fruit. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank ASG Chiari for his briefing. Over the past week, tensions have flared up in the security situation in the Sweda area in southern Syria, with more acute antagonisms between ethnic groups and a rapid escalation of armed conflict, claiming lives of hundreds of people. It is imperative for parties to the conflict to respect international humanitarian law. Under no circumstances are attacks and killings of civilians accepted or tolerated. It is important and imperative to stabilize the security situation and restore social order as soon as possible. We have noted reports that the Syrian interim authorities have reached a ceasefire with the parties concerned. We call on all parties to abide by the ceasefire agreement, remain calm and exercise restraint, cease hostilities and promote an early de-escalation of the situation. The situation in Sweda once again shows that the current situation in Syria remains complex and fragile. Achieving peace and stability still faces daunting challenges. The Syrian interim authorities should, in line with the principles set forth in the Council Resolution 2254, continue to promote the political process with broad participation from all walks of life, address the concerns of all parties through inclusive dialogue, and effectively promote internal unity and reconciliation. Counterterrorism is an important aspect of restoring peace and stability in Syria. The Syrian interim authorities should fulfill its counterterrorism obligations and take effective measures to combat all terrorist groups listed by the Council, including the ETIM. At a time when the situation in southern Syria is turbulent, Israel has recently launched multiple airstrikes on Sweda, Daraa, Damascus, and other places, and even carried out military strikes on key Syrian government departments. Israel's actions gravely violate international law, infringe upon Syria's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, and bring new complications to Syria's peace, stability, and political transition. China unequivocally condemns them. We call on Israel to immediately cease its military strikes on Syria and withdraw from Syrian territory as soon as possible. The international community recognizes that the Golan is the occupied Syrian territory. The sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria should be respected. The relevant Council resolutions should be implemented, and the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement should be observed. And the mandate delivery of UNDOF should be guaranteed. President, to conclude, I would like to point out that at present, hotspot issues in the Middle East are emerging one after another, with new and old antagonisms intertwined and overlapping, from Gaza to the Red Sea, from Yemen to Iran, from Lebanon to Syria. Conflicts and wars are ongoing. The situation is complex and volatile. The state of affairs is neither in the interests of any country in the Middle East nor those of the international community. As the body with the primary responsibility for international peace and security, the Council should resolutely fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter and use all the tools in its toolbox to make positive effort to bring the conflicts to an early end, restore peace and stability in the relevant region, and achieve lasting peace and stability in the Middle East. China is ready to work with the international community to play a constructive role in this regard. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Assistant Secretary General Chiari for his briefing. Let me begin by reiterating our support to the Syrian people in rebuilding their country on a path towards a better future. Today, I wish to make the following remarks. First, we are deeply alarmed by the escalation of violence in Syria province, which has reportedly resulted in hundreds of deaths and left many more injured and displaced. We call on all parties to adhere fully to the ceasefire, to put an end to sectarian discourse, and instead engage in constructive dialogue and prioritize the safety of civilians. We strongly condemn all acts of violence targeting civilians, including arbitrary killings, which have been reported. These incidents demand immediate and transparent investigations and robust follow-up actions to ensure accountability, in line with international law and standards. We call on the Syrian authorities to deliver on their pledge to ensure accountability. Second, we reiterate our urgent call for an immediate cessation of all violence across Syria. It is an imperative for the government to protect all communities and for all actors to refrain from any action that could endanger the diverse social fabric of the Syrian nation. Third, we call on all neighboring countries and external powers to respect Syria's independence, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and to contribute positively to the success of the transition in Syria, which remains of central importance for regional peace and stability. We condemn the recent Israeli attacks on Syrian territory, as well as reports of IDF redeployments in the Golan. We call on Israel to respect and withdraw from the demilitarized zone and adhere to the 1974 disengagement agreement. Mr. President, after the much-needed end to the war in Syria, the Syrian people need time, space, and peace to recover, rebuild, and reconcile. Unfortunately, none of these things can happen unless all Syrians feel truly safe and protected. This moment is also an opportunity to enhance cooperation with Lebanon in areas of common concern and for Syria to become a force for stability in a fragile region. I wish to conclude by once again expressing our readiness to cooperate with Syria, the Council members, and the wider international community in support of a genuine, credible, orderly, and inclusive political transition, which the Syrian people truly deserve. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, what Syria is going through now is at the time the resurgence of old tensions after decades of oppression and the danger of the country being brought into the regional tensions. This means that the Council has two duties as regards our work. First of all, we need to help Syria build an inclusive, impartial state which has a monopoly on the use of force, and to do it as quickly as possible, and also send to the countries in the region, starting with Israel, an appeal to refrain from using force against their neighbor. Today, therefore, we would like to underscore 3 points. First, the priority in this transition period is to avoid Syria sliding into violence and fracturing. France welcomes the ceasefire last night after Syria's clashes in the region of Soweto over the past several days. And we realize it's fragile, and we call all of the actors to uphold it and do everything they can to guarantee the security of civilians, restore calm, and promote peace amongst all of the parts of the Syrian society, including between the Druze and other communities in Soweto. The atrocities against civilians that France is strongly condemning have to stop, and the responsibility has to be identified and brought to justice in line with the commitment undertaken by the Syrian transition president. The humanitarian access and providing basic services have to be restored. We welcome the resumption of dialogue between the Syrian authorities and the authorities in the Soweto region that this Council has support so as to arrive at a lasting agreement to strengthen the unity, stability, and the sovereignty of Syria, as well as the security and safety of all Syrians. Second point, France calls upon Israel to not conduct unilateral actions which can destabilize Syria. Strikes by Israel against Syrian territory in Soweto, in Daraa, and in Damascus, and information we have according to which the Israeli forces are redeploying in the Golan, As a result of that, we call on Israel and on all parties to uphold the ceasefire and seize the historic opportunity, which is Syria wanting to have peaceful relations with its neighbors. Israel has to end its military activities on Syrian territory and withdraw from the separation area, which was established under the Disengagement of Forces Agreement in 1974. Syria and Israel have to take into account the security concerns of each other, and everything has to be made to make sure that we help Syria become an axis of stability in the Middle East. Thirdly, the Syrian Authority have to do everything they can to restore civil peace. Continued violence show the scope of challenges that Syria is facing. The clashes in Sweda in the recent days, attacks against the Druze population south of Damascus at the end of April, and the attempt against attack on a church several days ago. The massacres against the Alawites in March have revived the specter of interconfessional violence. It's up to the Syrian authorities to do everything they can to restore calm between the components of Syrian society and to put an end to terrorist threat. In order to do that, the principle of accountability and transitional justice has to be used as a lodestar by the transition Syrian authorities. Those who are responsible for interconfessional and intercommunity violence have to be held accountable. We take note, therefore, here of the commitment by Damascus to investigate the violence in Soweto, and the outcome of the investigation of what happened in Mars in the coastal regions is also something that we are awaiting very much. Establishment, civil peace, and social cohesion means that there has to be true dialogue amongst all components of this society, and they have to be included in the political transition process, and the protection of rights of all Syrian men and women have to be ensured. Mr. President, the possibility of building a new Syria is a unique opportunity. France reiterates the fact that we are available to support the Syrian Authority to ensure that transition is successful, to make sure that it's fully representative of all Syrians and reflects their hopes and aspirations. And this Council and the international community have the responsibility to assist the Syrian transition authorities so as to help them with the economic recovery of the country and to restore civil calm. Our Council has to be ready to draw conclusions together with the Secretariat to best organize the support of the United Nations towards Syria. I thank you.
Representative of France for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank ASG Khiari for his comprehensive briefing. Allow me to highlight 3 points today. First, Denmark is deeply concerned by the recent escalation of violence in the Sweda region of Syria, with troubling reports of hundreds of people killed. We are alarmed by this tragic loss of life and strongly condemn all acts of violence against civilians. The immediate priority must be to halt the bloodshed. We call on the Syrian transitional authorities to take tangible steps to this end, to prioritize de-escalation and restore calm. Reports about a newly announced ceasefire offer some hope, and we urge all parties to immediately stop the violence. All parties must exercise maximum restraint and uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law. This includes protecting all civilians, regardless of their ethnic or religious affiliation. This also includes facilitating rapid and unimpeded access for emergency humanitarian aid, as well as ensuring safe passage for civilians to evacuate. Syria has come a long way since the fall of the Assad regime. However, there can be no meaningful recovery without genuine safety and protection for all Syria's communities. This need for security and restraint also applies to the broader region. Denmark is deeply concerned by Israel's escalatory strikes on Syrian territory, including in Damascus just yesterday. We reiterate our full support for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Second, Mr. President, the renewed violence underscores that while progress has been made, the status quo in Syria remains unsustainable. Further steps must be taken to ensure a genuine political transition, to integrate all security forces under one unified national command, and to extend the government's authority across Syria. We strongly encourage the Syrian transitional authorities to expeditiously implement these crucial measures. Such steps are vital to address the legitimate aspirations of all Syrians and to foster a truly inclusive political process in line with Resolution 2254 that can lead to a durable resolution of the conflict. Third and finally, Mr. President, we call for full accountability for all crimes committed in Sueda. Reports of civilian deaths, including through field executions, demand a thorough investigation. We urge the Syrian transitional authorities to ensure that accountability for any committed crime is swiftly and transparently secured. This commitment to justice must also extend to past deplorable incidents, including the killings of Alawite citizens in Latakia and Tartus in March 2025. Impunity only breeds further violence and erodes trust. Upholding accountability for all atrocities, regardless of the victim or perpetrator, is essential for building a foundation of peace and justice in Syria. Mr. President, in closing, it is imperative that all parties prioritize de-escalation and dialogue at this critical moment. Syria, and indeed the broader Middle East region, cannot afford another spiral of conflict and violence. The developments in Sueda underscore the need for urgent action. Let me reiterate Denmark's firm commitment to supporting all diplomatic efforts that can bring an end to the suffering, foster reconciliation, and pave the way for a stable and prosperous future for all Syrians. I thank you.
Thanking the representative of Denmark for the statement, I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Khalid Khiari, for your briefing, and I welcome the Syrian representative. First, let me be clear. The United States unequivocally condemns the violence in Sueda. All parties must step back and engage in meaningful dialogue that leads to a lasting ceasefire. Over the last 48 hours, the United States has led diplomatic efforts to promote real de-escalation and peace. We are actively engaging all constituencies in Syria to navigate toward calm and continued discussions on integration and a stable, more prosperous future for all Syrians. To that end, we are calling on the Syrian government to lead on determining the path forward. We have seen deeply troubling reports of atrocities committed against Syrian civilians. The government must investigate all reports of abuse and hold the perpetrators accountable. While the United States did not support recent Israeli strikes, we are engaging diplomatically with Israel and Syria at the highest levels, both to address the present crisis and reach a lasting agreement between two sovereign states. President Trump has outlined his clear vision of a prosperous Middle East and a stable Syria at peace with itself and its neighbors. Peace among neighbors, including Israel and Syria, is a critical component of this vision. In closing, Mr. President, the United States supports Syria's national unity and seeks a peaceful and inclusive resolution with its minority constituents. We are actively working toward that end and have welcomed the support of our allies, including Turkey, France, the UK, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, who are working toward the same issue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank SG Kerry for his briefing. The violence in southern Syria this week epitomizes major security challenges that Damascus faces. From continued foreign intrusion against its territory to ongoing sectarian conflicts aggravated by armed conflict still not under control of the central government. Let me highlight the following 3 points in this regard. First, all hostilities violating Syria's territorial sovereignty must stop. This bloodshed, which began as armed clashes among sects that Damascus attempted to manage, has escalated into an interstate armed conflict with the Israel intervention. Symbolized by its strike on the Syrian Ministry of Defense building yesterday. Protection of a specific sect is not a justifiable cause acknowledged by international law for violating the principle of non-aggression, especially when the administration in charge of the civilians has intervened to subdue the clashes. We call for Israel to immediately cease any further intrusion against the territorial sovereignty of Syria and to recommit to 1974 disengagement agreement. Second, we call for Damascus to take all necessary measures to prevent any sectarian conflicts from being aggravated into violence. Since the fall of Assad regime, a worrisome trend has appeared in that a sectarian conflict develops into a widespread armed clashes among sects, claiming numerous lives of civilians. From the March coastal massacres to this week's violence, reports repeatedly indicate the militants affiliated with Damascus often subject minority sects to sectarian insults, abuse, and even extrajudicial killings, pouring fuel on existing violation situations. Such repeated trends demand Syria to take a systematic approach in preventing further atrocities. One of the first steps that merits consideration is to prohibit members of the army from using any sectarian words and deeds and holding perpetrators to account. Equally meaningful is Damascus' announcements for its plan to achieve transitional justice in a transparent and inclusive manner. In any case, we believe UN's technical expertise will be crucial in achieving these goals, and we call for the Secretariat to actively engage with Damascus to navigate solutions. Third, we call for actors in Syria to recommit to dialogue with an aim to achieve national reconciliation and build an inclusive nation. Repeated sectarian violence has shown the fragmented Syria is subject to turmoil and even risks illegitimate foreign intervention. Meanwhile, sectarian violence is caused by multiple factors that cannot be addressed through military means, including complex history among sects and the fear of minority sects in their security. This proves why the ongoing political process must be inclusive in a manner that all Syrians can genuinely accept. Minority sects can be assured of their future and safely only with a sincere belief that the process is truly inclusive. In this regard, we call all actors, including Damascus, to recommit to the political process with genuine and meaningful representations of all Syrians. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for this statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Pakistan. We thank Assistant Secretary General Khalid Kyari for his comprehensive briefing. We echo the Secretary General's concern at the continuing escalation of violence in Suweda and call for an immediate de-escalation and return to normalcy. We welcome the ceasefire brokered by US, Turkey, and Arab countries for maintenance of internal security in Suweda. And we take note of the statements by the Syrian authorities to effectively address the situation and to ensure the safety and security of all Syrians. Pakistan condemns the recent Israeli airstrikes on Suweda, Dara, and in the center of Damascus, as well as the reported redeployment of Israeli forces in the occupied Syrian Golan. These acts represent a grave and deliberate escalation and are flagrant violation of international law, the UN Charter, relevant Security Council resolutions, and Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. These Israeli attacks come at a time when Syria is navigating a delicate yet meaningful transition. After more than a decade of conflict, the Syrian people are beginning to nurture a sense of renewed hope. Hope for peace, for dignity and for the reconstruction of their country. There have been visible signs of political and economic re-engagement. Major sanctions have been lifted, offering much-needed economic relief, and a slow but discernible momentum is building towards national recovery. While the consolidation of security remains an ongoing and challenging task, Syrian authorities have demonstrated a willingness, both domestically and in their regional and international outreach, to pursue stability and reconciliation. There have been clear signals and publicly expressed intentions by the Syrian leadership to pursue peaceful relations with the wider region. Against this backdrop, Israel's reckless attacks on Syrian state institutions are both counterproductive and irrational. I would like to highlight 4 key points here. First, Israel's continued military aggression is not just irresponsible, it is also dangerous and deliberately destabilizing. We call for the immediate cessation of all violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity and respect for the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement and all relevant UNSC resolutions. Second, Israel's repeated violations constitute direct interference in Syria's internal affairs, undermine national institutions, impede reconstruction, and obstruct efforts at reconciliation. The current moment in Syria needs solidarity and support, not aggression and sabotage. Fostering internal cohesion, harmony, and inclusion by embracing Syria's rich diversity would pave the way for advancing genuine reconciliation and ensuring lasting stability across the country in line with key principles under Resolution 2254. Third, these continued violations by Israel exemplify impunity. Whether in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, or Yemen, Israel continues to act outside the bounds of international law, with complete disregard for the principle of state sovereignty, non-interference, intervention, and the prohibition on the use of force enshrined in Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. The international community's failure to hold Israel accountable emboldens such violations and undermines the international order based on UN Charter and principles of international law. This impunity must end. Fourth, the erosion of Syria's state authority through external attacks creates dangerous security vacuums. These conditions further risk enabling the resurgence of terrorist and extremist groups that could be a threat to the entire region and beyond. Israel's actions are not only unlawful, but ultimately self-defeating, as they breed the very instability they claim to resist. Colleagues, Syria needs space. It needs support for reform and recovery. The international community must come together to preserve regional stability and advance the prospect of a just and lasting peace. At this critical moment, Pakistan stands in full solidarity with the brotherly people of Syria. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, President. I thank you and I thank your team for the swift response to my country's request to convene this emergency session to discuss the consequences of the wanton Israeli aggression on the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic. I also thank the delegation of Algeria and Somalia for supporting our request. I extend my thanks to Mr. Khaled Khiari, ASG, for his briefing. Mr. President, this meeting comes against the backdrop of a serious Israeli escalation manifested in a series of repeated airstrikes on Syrian territories in recent days. It resulted in the martyrdom and injury of several civilians and military personnel and caused severe damage to government facilities. These attacks peaked yesterday, Wednesday. when Israeli occupation forces targeted with the drones and airplanes several official buildings in the heart of the capital, Damascus, including the presidential palace and the staff command building, during rush hour. These attacks resulted in dozens of casualties. The attacks also targeted government headquarters in the governorates of Daraa and Suwaida. The Syrian Arab Republic strongly condemns this blatant Israeli aggression, which constitutes a flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter, and a violation of the sovereignty of a UN member state. Syria categorically rejects the pretext used by the Israeli authorities to justify these acts of aggression. We affirm that such practices are merely an extension of the occupation's systematic policies aimed at undermining Syria's stability and dragging it into conflict. In a recent month, as you all know, Israel has repeatedly violated the 1974 disengagement agreement by crossing the area of separation and through the incursion into areas in the governorates of Quneitra, Daraa, and rural Damascus, committing violations against civilians, establishing illegal military sites, and seizing natural resources. To add insult to injury, these Israeli attacks directly aim at obstructing the efforts of the Syrian state to restore security and stability and to contain internal tensions through a national approach. This was evident in the painful events in the Suwaida governorate, where state institutions swiftly responded to tensions. They intervened to de-escalate, to protect civilians and restore order and stability in coordination with local dignitaries. However, Israeli attacks undermined these efforts and worsened the situation, effectively waging an open war on Syria. Despite the gravity of the Israeli attacks, the Syrian leadership acted with utmost wisdom and responded to American, Arab, and Turkish mediation efforts, whom we thank. These efforts helped prevent the region from sliding into an open confrontation. The Syrian leadership made sovereign decisions based on supreme national interests to preserve the country's unity and the safety of its citizens. It also ensured that it is intent on preventing all violations and holding the perpetrators accountable. Syria affirms that it will not hesitate to fulfill its duty towards all its citizens, especially in light of the compounded challenges caused by security chaos and the proliferation of weapons left behind by the former regime. It will pursue its relentless efforts to enforce the rule of law across the entire national territory and to ensure that weapons remain solely in the hands of the state. Syria is resolute in not going backward. The efforts of the Syrian government received support from Syria's regional and international partners who share our concerns regarding combating terrorism, drying up its funding sources, securing borders, and confronting the scourge of arms and drug smuggling that has plagued the Syrian people and the region alike. Mr. President, Syria will remain a state for all its people. This is the source of our national dignity and pride. Syrians are united without discrimination. They are determined to resist any attempt at division or incitement among the factions of the Syrian people. They will not allow any external party to drag them into a war aimed at fragmenting Syria and scattering its efforts. They reject any pretext used by the occupying authorities to wage acts of aggression and violations of international law against their country. My country's delegation affirms that condemning and Confronting the Israeli violations is a collective responsibility that lies at the heart of the Council's mandate in accordance with the UN Charter and international law. And I would like to draw the Council's attention to a comment I heard, which is that the Israeli bombardments delayed a visit from the OPCW to Syria. And this is something that harms positive and constructive cooperation between Syria and the organization. Mr. President, while Syria calls on the Security Council and the Secretariat to condemn the Israeli attacks, it also urges the international community to confront this serious threat to international peace and security and to the unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic and to international law and the UN Charter, including relevant resolutions, and namely resolutions 242, 338, and 497. Syria stresses the need for immediate efforts to stop these Israeli attacks and prevent their recurrence, and to compel Israel to withdraw from the areas it has penetrated and end its occupation of the Syrian Golan. Syria has repeatedly reaffirmed that it is aiming at achieving security and stability on its territory and throughout the region, and that it poses no threat to any country in or outside the region. At the same time, Syria has called on all member states to refrain from any actions that would undermine Syria's sovereignty, independence, unity, or territorial integrity, or interfere in its internal affairs and destabilize its security and stability. My country's delegation had refuted in its letter dated the 3rd of March the Israeli claims regarding their defense of a component of the Syrian people, affirming the government's full commitment to protecting all Syrians, preserving national unity, and promoting civil peace. That was in our letter dated the 3rd of March. Mr. President, in conclusion, only the Syrians are concerned with and capable of addressing their internal challenges and strengthening civil peace through a Syrian-Syrian dialogue, away from destructive foreign interventions aimed at fueling discord and dividing the Syrians. Syrians have always lived together without ever knowing terms like majority or minority. Their religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity has always been a source of pride, helping them to overcome together many hardships and challenges. Today, more than ever, Syrians are united in rejecting Israeli aggression and anything that threatens their country's security and stability. They firmly reject terrorism, hate speech, incitement to violence, and anything that undermines their national unity. Mr. President, Syria, as you have said, needs support. It needs the international community to stand by it. It does not need acts of aggression by the Israeli occupation on any other party. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Saudi Arabia.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace, mercy, and grace of God be upon you. Allow me to congratulate the Islamic Republic of Pakistan on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. We highly value the distinguished efforts made by the Pakistani mission in leading the deliberations of the Council. We thank ASG Khaled Khayari for his valuable briefing on the developments in the Syrian Arab Republic. The Kingdom is fully committed to supporting the brotherly Syrian people through all and any plight. The Kingdom has stood by the Syrian people in all critical junctures. It has consistently endeavored to find comprehensive political solutions that preserve the unity and territorial integrity of Syria, that restore security, stability, and peace. Our position is based on firm parameters, most notably the respect of the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic, the territorial integrity and the independence of the Syrian Arab Republic, and rejecting all forms of external interferences or violations of Syrian sovereignty. We express our grave concern over continued escalatory Israeli airstrikes against Suwaida, Deraa, and the heart of Damascus. We condemn targeting civilian infrastructure and populated areas. This constitutes a direct threat to international and regional peace and security. This also undermines UN efforts aiming to achieving a comprehensive settlement, political settlement in Syria. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, my delegation condemns continued unjust Israeli attacks against Syrian territory. We condemn any interference in its internal affairs. We condemn the undermining of its security and stability. This is a violation, continued violation of international law and the disengagement of forces agreement of 1974. These repeated attacks cannot be considered in isolation. They are linked to existing Israeli policies that are based on violating the sovereignty of states, on ignoring international law, on defying the will of the international community represented by this Council. The Israeli occupation forces continue to violate the sovereignty of states with impunity. This is a result of the lack of international accountability. This emboldened the occupation forces to commit more violations, not only in Syria, but in other parts of the region. Against this background, my delegation reiterates its firm position. We support Syria. We stand by Syria. We reject any action that undermines civil and societal peace. We call upon your august council to do the following: taking a clear and decisive stance against repeated Israeli violations of Syrian territory, enforcing the implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions, ensuring that Israeli attacks stop immediately and holding those responsible accountable, supporting international efforts to achieve comprehensive political stability in Syria away from any external interference. We reiterate the importance of respecting the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic and its territorial integrity. It's important not to allow any interference in its internal affairs. The international community must support efforts made by the Syrian government to achieve security and stability. In this regard, my delegation welcomes the announcement by His Excellency, the President of the Syrian Arab Republic, of arrangements and measures to contain the latest events in Syria. We welcome efforts that ensures that Syria stays on the right track, that maintains the unity and territorial integrity of Syria and consolidates national unity. These efforts ensure the cohesion among all components of Syrian society. Sectarian strife should not be allowed to flourish. Sectarian strife would destabilize the country. The unity and security of the country must be maintained in order for the aspirations to be fulfilled. In conclusion, we reiterate our call to the international community to stand by the Syrian Arab Republic, the brotherly Syrian Arab Republic, and support it at this critical juncture. We must stop a repeated Israeli attacks and violations. We warn that continued violations and the extremist Israeli policies would increase the dangers of violence, extremism, and instability in the region. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Saudi Arabia.
أشكر ممثل المملكة العربية السعودية على بيانه وأعطي الكلمة الآن إلى إسرائيل.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me as well to thank ASG Khiari for his briefing this afternoon. Again today, we find ourselves in an urgent meeting of the Council. A serious crisis has been unfolding in Syria over the last couple of months that too many choose to ignore. The systematic prosecution of minorities in Syria and the dangerous consequences that extend far beyond its borders. But unsurprisingly, that is not why the relevant Council members called for this emergency session today. Instead, they convened this meeting in a politically motivated move to condemn the State of Israel while ignoring the brutal massacre being carried out on Syria's people. Mr. President, over the past 6 months, we have witnessed a return of targeted violence against Syria's most vulnerable communities. Mass killings of Alawites in northwestern Syria, entire villages and neighborhoods wiped out. Then brutal aggression against the Kurds in the north. Just last week, the ancient Mar Mikhael church in the southern city of Sueda was razed, burned to the ground. Just days earlier, armed rebels carried out a deadly assault on another church, continuing their campaign of terror and destruction. And in the past few days, we have seen a new wave of violence being unleashed against the Druze community in southern Syria, a region close to Israel's northern border. The images emerging from that area are horrifying. Civilians murdered and slaughtered in cold blood, communities decimated, elders stripped of their humanity and mocked, cultural heritage erased. This is not incidental. Unfortunately, it is emerging as a pattern. It is a persecution carried out in stages by violent mobs, inflamed and directed by organized jihadist militias, who massacre the Druze population and other minorities who simply want to live their lives. This needs to stop now, and those responsible must be held accountable. Mr. President, what else needs to happen before the members of the international community raise their voice and give their attention, this time in the right direction? What more must we see? Another massacre, another village reduced to ashes, another wave of Druze civilians dragged from their homes and publicly humiliated? Mr. President, in the book of Leviticus, God orders, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you shall not stand idly by the bloodshed of your fellow. This is not just our religious obligation, but a moral one. We will not stand idly by as our close brothers and sisters are being slaughtered. This moral obligation is enshrined as formal law in Israel's legal code. And for this very reason, Israel carried out these precise strikes against jihadist militants in southern Syria. Israel's position is clear. We have a commitment to preserve the southwestern region of Syria as a demilitarized area and to prevent the rise of terrorist threats along our border. But we also have an unwavering moral obligation to safeguard the Druze population with whom we share deep historic and national bonds. Their pain is our pain. Their safety is our concern. Just 2.5 months ago, an earlier campaign of violence against the Druze near Damascus was halted because of our actions, both diplomatic and military. And yet here we are again. History has repeated itself in a matter of months. As a result of the actions of Israel this week, a ceasefire was achieved yesterday and the armed forces withdrew to Damascus. Mr. President, let me emphasize, we do not seek to involve ourselves in Syria's internal politics. Our interests are limited, clear, and legitimate. We seek to maintain regional stability on our northern border. We are determined to prevent terrorist infrastructure from taking root close to our borders and wherever terror poses a threat. And we are committed to protecting the lives and dignity of the Druze people in Syria who are targeted simply because of who they are. This is also part of our commitment to the Druze community who live in Israel, who are an integral part of the vibrant Israeli society, including its culture and traditions, who are also significant contributors to the safety and security of the State of Israel. To those who speak of winds of change in the Middle East, the international community must act, not only in statements. The international community must act against the perpetrators behind this violence in Syria and hold them accountable. And the international community must make it clear that the persecution of minorities in Syria will not be tolerated. It is not too late, but the time to speak out and to act is now. Let us hope the ceasefire in the south of Syria holds and that our Druze brothers and sisters get to live in peace and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia.
Mr. President, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. The Arab Group expresses its strong condemnation of the occupation forces, the unjust occupation forces that have persisted in violating Syrian sovereignty through airstrikes that have been conducted by its forces over the past 2 days against the heart of the capital, Damascus, including the General Staff compound and the vicinity of the President's palace. This led to the martyrdom of many, the injury of many civilians and military personnel. These actions also inflicted significant material damage on property and infrastructure that is already decrepit owing to years of war and international sanctions. The Arab Group condemns in the strongest terms this unjust aggression that is a flagrant attack on the sovereignty of an Arab country. These airstrikes are grave violations of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. They constitute an unforgivable disregard of the principles of the international order based on the respect of the sovereignty of states and non-interference in their internal affairs. The Arab Group believes that the actions of the occupying power amount to military thuggery that should not be condoned. This requires a decisive international stance to stop these repeated attacks that aim to spreading chaos and undermining stability in Syria. They constitute a direct threat to regional security and stability. Mr. President, the attack by the occupation army, the latest attack on Syrian territory, is part of the series of repeated serious violations of the Charter of the United Nations, especially Article 2. They're also a violation of the Geneva Conventions of 1949. These violations completely, as always, completely disregard Security Council resolutions related to Syria, including resolutions 242, 338, and 497, that all stress the importance of preserving the sovereignty of Syria, its unity, and reject the annexation of any part of Syria by force. The group, once again, categorically rejects all flimsy pretexts used by occupation forces to justify their aggressive actions against the Syrian states, especially claims to protect minorities or claims to counter alleged security threats. We warn of known attempts by the occupation entity to stoke strife, to stoke ethnic strife within the Syrian society. They are using situations on the ground to entrench a new occupation reality, which would push the whole region towards more tragedy, more chaos, that are then being invested by and used by terrorist groups in our region.
In this context, the Arab Group firmly rejects the attempts of the occupying regime to exploit the military escalation against Syria and to use their aggression to serve their own interests. In support of Syria's unity and stability, the Arab Group reaffirms its commitment to a political solution and the need to continue dialogue under UN auspices away from foreign dictations that serve agendas that are not in the interest of the Syrian people. It strongly rejects any attempts to divide Syria or impose a new reality that lacks international legitimacy. The Arab Group also welcomes the agreement reached to end the crisis in the governorate of Suwaida. It emphasizes the importance of its implementation to protect Syria, its unity, and its citizens, to prevent further bloodshed, and to ensure the protection of civilians, the state sovereignty, and the rule of law. The group also welcomes the commitment of Syrian President Ahmed al-Shar to hold accountable all those responsible for violations against Syrian citizens in al-Suwaida and to support all efforts to restore security, state authority, and the rule of law throughout Suwaida and the Syrian territory while rejecting violence, sectarianism, incitement, and hatred. Mr. President, the continued occupation and violation of the sovereignty of Arab states without deterrence or accountability and the systematic use of military force in blatant disregard of international norms and customs pose a grave threat to collective regional and international security. It undermines the credibility of the international system and its institutions. The Arab group condemns these aggressive policies. It calls on the Security Council to take immediate and effective action and to fulfill its legal and moral responsibilities in confronting these violations, to compel the occupying power to immediately cease its aggression, and to fully comply with international law, including to withdraw from all occupied Syrian territories, foremost the Syrian Arab Golan, and to take the necessary measures to ensure accountability and deterrence in accordance with international legal and judicial mechanisms. In conclusion, the Arab group affirms that Syria's security and stability are an integral part of the regional and international security system, and that preserving its sovereignty and territorial integrity is a non-negotiable Arab and international commitment. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Tunisia for the statement and would give the floor now to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, thank you, Mr. President, for convening this urgent and important meeting to address the ongoing acts of aggression by the Israeli regime against the Syrian Arab republics. At the outset, I would like to extend our sincere congratulations to Pakistan on assuming the presidency of Security Council for the month of July. We are confident in your able leadership. We also commend Guyana for its effective and successful leadership of the Council during the month of June. I thank ASG Mr. Khiari for his briefing. Mr. President, we strongly condemn the recent large-scale military attacks by the Israeli regime against the Syrian Arab Republic. These deliberate acts of aggression, including those on the capital, Damascus, targeted infrastructures and public and government facilities. This marks a dangerous escalation by a regime that still illegally occupies parts of Syrian territory in flagrant violation of international law and the UN Charter. I wish to make the following points. First, these military attacks happen alongside Israeli ongoing occupation of the Syrian Golan. For decades, Israel has pursued illegal annexation and settlement expansion in this occupied territory, defying the UN Charter and numerous Security Council resolutions. Second, the Israeli regime has become the gravest and serious threat to regional peace and security in the region. This is due to its continued act of aggression and the constant and unconditional political and military support it received from the United States and some Western countries. These states must bear the responsibility for enabling Israel's illegal actions and atrocious crime, which endanger not only the region, but also international peace and security. Third, the attacks on Syria are a direct result of this Council's silence and the international community failure to act. Israel has faced no consequences for its repeated systematic violation of international law and continues to act with complete impunity. This aggression follows Israel's 12-day military act of aggression against Iran in a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, with full and unconditional support from the United States. The Israeli regime deliberately targeted Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities under IAEA safeguard, along with civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and residential neighborhoods. This illegal attack resulted in the martyrdom of over 1,100 civilians, among them 41 children and 126 women. 7 hospitals, 11 ambulances, and more than 3,500 homes were destroyed. These undeniable facts reveal the criminal and aggressive nature of the Israeli regime. Fourth, the root causes of instability are clear. Israel's illegal occupation, repeated aggression, systematic and widespread violation of international law and the UN Charter, and the unconditional support it received from a permanent member of this Council. It is time for the Security Council to act. The Council must fulfill its Charter responsibilities by ending Israel's impunity and holding it accountable for its repeated violations. Continued inaction has only emboldened the aggressors. This silence is especially alarming as Israel commits mass atrocities in Gaza, using starvation as a method of war and killing tens of thousands of civilians, including women and children, and systematically destroying vital infrastructure. Only through justice, accountability, and the end of Israeli occupation and aggression can our region move toward real peace, stability, and collective security. Finally, we reaffirm our unwavering support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic. We urge the interim government of Syria to fully respect the rights of all minorities and to resolve internal differences through inclusive dialogue and peaceful means. The fundamental principles of the international law and the UN Charter, particularly the prohibition of the use of force, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of a state must be strictly observed. The Israeli regime has absolutely no legal or moral justification to violate Syrian sovereignty or interfere in its internal affairs under the false pretext of protecting minority rights. Such illegal action constitute blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter and must be unequivocally condemned by this Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Jordan.
بداية أتقدم بالتهنئة.
At the outset, I wish to congratulate my brother from the Islamic Republic of Pakistan on taking up the presidency of the Security Council for July. We wish the delegation every success. Mr. President, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan has followed with grave concern the reputable events that have occurred in the sisterly Syrian Arab Republic in recent days. We are unanimous. The security and stability of Syria are interlinked with regional security and stability and are a common priority. We condemn the repeated Israeli aggressions against the Syrian Arab Republic, a sisterly country. These aggressions constitute a flagrant violation of international law and of the disengagement agreement of 1974. They also stand as a shameless attack against the sovereignty of Syria and a dangerous escalation eroding stability, sovereignty, and the security of Syria. It is incumbent upon the international community, and more specifically upon the Security Council, to constrain Israel and to compel them to finally put an end to their repeated aggressions, as well as to cease all interference in Syria's domestic affairs. Indeed, the Syrian government is striving to build a new and free Syria, a sovereign, stable and safe Syrian for all its citizens, and has done so since the 8th of December last year. However, Israel, without the slightest justification, is continuing its aggressions and violating Syrian territory and airspace. Israel is sowing discord and division, and that will lead to chaos, conflict, and tension. Mr. President, Syria's security and our security, the security of the south of Syria, is an extension of our national security and is inextricably linked with our strategic stability. Syria is a unique opportunity for our region, a glimmer of hope to turn a dark page of history. Syria must succeed. Syria must reach stability because its stability is the very cornerstone of our stability. We express here our hope to see the end of all foreign interference and the end of Israeli aggression. Mr. President, we hail the agreement aiming to put an end to the crisis in the Sueda Governorate. The implementation of this agreement is necessary for the protection of Syria, for its unity, and for the protection of all its citizens. And this is necessary so that the Syrian bloodshed is stemmed and to guarantee the protection of civilians and the rule of law. We welcome the commitment of the Syrian government in terms of holding perpetrators of all abuses against Syrian citizens in Sueda accountable. And we urge the Syrian government to make all effort necessary to restore state control and security and the rule of law across the Sueda Governorate and across the territory as a whole. We reaffirm our support for the Syrian government in its efforts to rebuild Syria on foundations which guarantee security, stability, unity and sovereignty of that country, and to preserve the security and right to rule of law of all Syrians. We want to see Syria get back on its feet, to recover. We want to see it turn the page on destruction, death and displacement, a page which has caused so much suffering for Syria and its people for so many years. The Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will do everything in its power to help Syria to build a better future for all the Syrian people. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Jordan for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. On December 8th, Syria began a historic transformation. After 14 years of suffering, Syrian people now have a chance for peace and stability. Despite many challenges, they have taken swift steps towards this goal. They have achieved remarkable progress in 7 months. Syrian leadership has shown its commitment to an inclusive political transition and national reconciliation under Syrian ownership. It has engaged in dialogue with diverse segments of society to ensure meaningful participation in shaping the country's future. It has taken concrete measures to bring together all components of Syrian society on the basis of equal citizenship. From the beginning, Turkey has supported Syria's efforts for peace, recovery and reconstruction. Many countries have taken a similar approach. We are observing growing international alignment in this direction. Turkey has consistently advocated for lifting sanctions on Syria. We welcome recent progress as decisions to ease substantial sanctions are already producing tangible efforts. However, Israel has continued its attacks relentlessly since 8 December, seeking to obstruct Syria's path to stability. Mr. President, Israel's ongoing aggression directly undermines Syria's rebuilding efforts on the basis of social cohesion. Its military interventions and provocative statements threaten the country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. These attacks, targeting Syria's presidential palace complex and Ministry of Defense, have clearly demonstrated Israel has no interest in the peace and stability of Syria or the region. We must reject all forms of Israeli aggression. These attacks destabilize the region and increase its civilian casualties and displacement. It is also concerning that the scale and geographic scope of these attacks have surpassed those previously directed at the fallen regime. The Syrian administration has stated it poses no threat to its neighbors. It is committed to fighting illegal armed groups and traffickers. Supporting those efforts would contribute far more to regional stability than undermining them. Mr. President, Syrian people should not be deprived of the opportunity for peace. Therefore, Security Council should stand united for the following. First, ensuring immediate de-escalation and ceasing Israeli aggression. Second, supporting Syrian administration efforts to restore calm in Sueda and prevent civilian casualties. Third, assisting the Syrian administration in ensuring accountability for those triggering violence in Sweda province. Reports of further Israeli deployments in Golan remain a cause for serious concern. It is essential to uphold sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria and to ensure full respect for the 1974 disengagement of forces agreement. We should support all efforts for national accord in Syria. We welcome efforts towards achieving a ceasefire and stabilizing the situation in the south, reflecting the consent of the Syrian government and relevant Syrian elements. I hope this ceasefire reached today will be lasting one. Mr. President, Turkey firmly believes that the determination of the Syrian people and their government, forged through years of hardship, will not be broken by these attacks. Yet, while the resilience of the Syrian people is clear, it is the duty of the international community to demonstrate that Syrians will not walk to this path. We remain committed to supporting Syria's efforts to secure a future for peace, stability, and prosperity for all Syrians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.